What are you waiting for? The giant bride did. And then she had a husband. The binding hurt. It always hurt. Bertha pulled the canvas strips tighter around her torso, compressing her powerful frame, forcing her shoulders forward, making herself smaller. The fabric bit into her skin, restricting her breathing, but that was the point. Be less. Take up less space. Become what people could tolerate instead of what she actually was. She'd been doing this for 3 months, ever since she'd answered the advertisement from Timothy Grayson of Redemption Creek. His letter had been different from the others. No requests for photographs, no questions about her appearance, just careful inquiries about her character, her hopes, her thoughts on building a life in harsh country. They'd exchanged 17 letters over those months, and somewhere in the correspondence, Bertha had done something dangerous. She'd been honest, not completely honest. She hadn't mentioned her height, 6 feet and 9 inches in her bare feet. She hadn't described her shoulders, broad enough to make most men look slight in comparison. She hadn't detailed the muscle that corded her arms from years of blacksmith work, or the hands that could bend horseshoes. She'd let him assume she was merely sturdy and capable, words that could mean anything. But she had been honest about everything else. Her loneliness, her dreams of a home, her weariness with being treated as spectacle or threat. And Timothy had responded with equal honesty. His own loneliness, his struggles with a ranch too large for his slight build, his yearning for partnership rather than the traditional dominance most men sought in marriage. Now, standing in the Denver boarding house, wearing her mother's wedding dress, the only dress large enough to contain her even bound, Bertha wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Timothy had sent train fare. He'd arranged for her transport from Denver to Redemption Creek. He was expecting her today, and he had no idea what was actually coming. The dress, once white, had yellowed to ivory over the 20 years since her mother's death. Bertha had been 10 then, already taller than most adult women, already developing the frame that would make her the subject of whispers and pointing. Her mother, on her deathbed, had pressed Bertha's hand and whispered, "Someday you'll wear this. Someday someone will see past the outside to who you are." 22 years later, at 32 years old, Bertha was still waiting for that someday. This dress had become both armor and prison, a visible declaration that she'd been meant for something besides the forge and the freight yard, even as it marked her as delusional. The giant bride, people called her, always the bride, never the wife. The stagecoach left at noon. Bertha climbed aboard, hunched over to fit through the door, taking up space meant for 2 passengers. The other travelers stared. She was used to that. She sat as small as possible, which wasn't very small at all, and endured the 6-hour journey to Redemption Creek in silence. By the time they arrived, the binding had made breathing an agony. Bertha's ribs ached, her shoulders screamed in protest, and spots danced at the edges of her vision. But she remained compressed, diminished, as close to acceptable as she could manage. The stage stopped outside the general store. Through the window, Bertha saw a figure waiting, small, slight, with sandy hair and clothes that hung on a frame that looked like it had never known hard labor. Timothy Grayson, her husband-to-be, the man whose letters had made her laugh and cry and hope for things she'd learned not to hope for. He looked terrified. Bertha's heart sank. Of course he was terrified. Even bound, even hunched, she was enormous. She climbed down from the stage carefully, and still the entire coach rocked with the weight redistribution. The few people on the street stopped to stare. Someone whispered, "Good Lord!" Timothy approached slowly, his face pale, his hands trembling. He stopped a few feet away, looking up at her, even hunched and bound. She towered over him by more than a foot. "Miss Bertha?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Mr. Grayson." She kept her own voice as soft as possible, trying not to add another intimidating element. I know I'm not what you expected. If you want to send me back, I understand. I can work to pay you back for the train fare." "You're taller than I imagined." He said it simply, stating fact without judgment. "Yes. And stronger, I'm guessing." "Yes." He tilted his head, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she forced herself to meet his eyes, pale blue, surprisingly steady, despite the trembling hands. "Why are you hunched over like that? Are you hurt?" The question surprised her. "No, I'm trying to be smaller, less intimidating." "Does it hurt, standing like that?" "A bit." "Then stop. Please, you're making my back ache just looking at you." Bertha stared at him. "Mr. Grayson." "Timothy." "Timmy, if you prefer. We've been writing to each other for months, Bertha. I think we're past formalities." He gestured toward a wagon. "Come on, let's get you home. And for heaven's sake, stand up straight. You'll do permanent damage to your spine slouching like that." Confused but obedient, Bertha straightened slightly. The relief was immediate, even though it made her tower over him even more dramatically. Timothy collected her single trunk, much lighter than its size suggested, containing little besides the clothes she wore and a few treasured letters, and loaded it into the wagon with visible effort. The ride to the ranch took 20 minutes. They didn't speak much, but Bertha noticed Timothy glancing at her periodically, his expression thoughtful rather than disgusted. When they arrived at the homestead, a modest cabin with a barn and fencing that had seen better days, he helped her down from the wagon. "We should talk," he said quietly. "Inside, privately." Bertha's chest tightened. Here it came. The rejection. The explanation that this couldn't work. She followed him into the cabin, ducking to clear the door frame, even hunched over. The interior was neat but spare. A table with 2 chairs, a stove, shelves holding supplies, and a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom. Timothy gestured for her to sit, but the chairs looked like they might collapse under her weight. She remained standing. Timothy faced her, and she noticed his hands were no longer trembling. He looked calm, resolved. "I need to confess something," he said, "and I need you to be completely honest in return. Can you do that?" "Yes. I never looked at your photograph." Bertha blinked. "What?" "When the agency sent your information, it included a photograph. I never looked at it. I read your letters instead, over and over, and I fell in love with the person who wrote them. The woman who noticed sunsets and worried about strayed dogs and dreamed of growing a garden. The woman who was honest about loneliness and brave enough to keep hoping anyway." He took a step closer. "I don't care what you look like, Bertha. I care who you are." "Timothy, you don't understand. I'm not just tall, I'm enormous. You're in pain right now, aren't you, from whatever you're doing to make yourself smaller?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Then stop. Please, let me see you as you actually are, not compressed or diminished, just you. If I do that, you'll send me away." I promise you I won't, but I need you to trust me. Trust what we wrote to each other. Trust that I meant what I said about wanting a partner, not a doll or a servant or some ideal that doesn't exist." His voice softened. "Please, Bertha, let me see you." Her hand shook as she reached for the buttons of her dress. She'd never undressed in front of a man before, never revealed what she kept hidden beneath the layers. But something in Timothy's eyes, not hunger or curiosity, but genuine concern, made her continue. She undid enough buttons to reach the binding. Her fingers found the knots she'd tied that morning in the boarding house, in another lifetime, when she'd still believed she could make herself acceptable. She pulled at them, and the canvas began to loosen. The relief was exquisite and terrible all at once. As the binding fell away, her shoulders rolled back to their natural position, her spine straightened, her chest expanded with a full breath for the first time in hours. She stood to her full height, and the cabin ceiling suddenly felt much closer. She towered over Timothy now, massive and undeniable. Her shoulders were broader than his by half. Her arms showed muscle definition even through the dress sleeves. Her hands could have encompassed both of his. She was everything society said a woman shouldn't be, too tall, too strong, too much. Timothy stared up at her. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes went wide, and then he started crying. Bertha's heart shattered. Of course this was too much. She'd been foolish to hope, foolish to think. "There you are," Timothy whispered, tears streaming down his face. "There you are." She froze. "What?" He moved closer, looking up at her with something like wonder. "This is you, really you, the person who wrote about wanting to be seen, about being tired of hiding. This is who I've been writing to. This is who I've been waiting for." "You're not disgusted?" "Disgusted?" He laughed, the sound breaking on a sob. "Bertha, I'm in awe. Look at you. You're magnificent. You're exactly what I've been hoping for and didn't dare to imagine. But I'm enormous. You're strong. You're powerful. You're everything this ranch needs and everything I can't be." He reached up, so far up, to touch her arm. His hand couldn't wrap even halfway around. "Do you know what my letters didn't tell you? What I was too ashamed to write?" "What?" "I'm weak, Bertha. Not just slight or small, actually weak. I can't do half the work this ranch requires. I struggle with fence posts. I can barely lift hay bales. I've been failing here for 3 years, and I've been too proud to admit it." His voice broke. "But you could do all of that, not because you'd have to, but because you can. Don't you see? What makes you too much for the rest of the world makes you exactly right for this life. For me." Bertha couldn't speak. Tears were falling now, tracking down her cheeks, and she couldn't stop them. Timothy took both her hands in his, her hands engulfing his completely, and looked up at her with absolute sincerity. "I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer honestly. Not what you think I want to hear, but the truth. All right. Do you want to marry me? The real me, not some idea of me from letters? Do you want to build a life here with all the hardship that entails? Do you want to be my partner, my wife, my companion in this strange, difficult life?" Bertha looked down at this small, trembling man who just called her magnificent, who'd asked her to stop hiding, who'd seen her at full height and full power and said, "There you are," instead of turning away. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes." "Then what are you waiting for?" Timothy smiled through his tears. Marry me. Right now. Today. Before either of us loses our nerve. But the town, there should be a proper ceremony. People will let them talk. They've been talking about me for years anyway. At least now they'll have something interesting to say. He squeezed her hands. I want to marry you right now, exactly as you are, standing at your full height in your mother's dress. Will you let me? Bertha nodded, not trusting her voice. Timothy left the cabin and returned 20 minutes later with 2 witnesses, the widow Henriksen, who lived closest to the ranch and had always been kind to Timothy, and traveling preacher named Walsh, who happened to be passing through. Both stared openly at Bertha. She stood straight, refusing to hunch, and met their gazes with as much dignity as she could muster. This is the woman I'm marrying, Timothy said simply. Do you object? Walsh cleared his throat. Son, are you certain about this? More certain than I've ever been about anything in my life. The ceremony was brief. Walsh rushed through the words, clearly uncomfortable, but professional. Timothy had to stand on the porch step to reach Bertha's face for the kiss, and even then she bent down to meet him halfway. When Walsh pronounced them married, Widow Henriksen's eyes were suspiciously damp. After the witnesses left, Bertha and Timothy stood alone in the cabin, officially husband and wife, neither quite believing it had happened. I should tell you, Bertha said quietly. I don't know how to be a wife. Not in all the ways. No one's ever wanted me before. And I've never been a husband, so we'll figure it out together. Timothy took her hand again, marveling at the size difference. But Bertha, I need you to understand something. I married you for who you are, all of who you are. That includes this. He gestured at her frame. Your strength, your size, your power. Those aren't flaws I'm willing to overlook. They're gifts I'm grateful for. You really mean that? I do, and I'm going to prove it to you every day until you believe me. They slept separately that first night, Timothy in the bedroom, Bertha on a pallet she made near the stove. The cabin felt smaller with her in it, but not uncomfortably so. Just filled, occupied in a way it hadn't been when Timothy lived alone. The next morning, Bertha woke before dawn and went outside to survey the ranch. In the growing light, she could see everything Timothy had described in his letters, the fencing that needed repair, the barn's sagging roof, the garden plot choked with weeds, the water pump that had broken months ago. She was examining the fence posts when Timothy emerged, coffee in hand. I made breakfast, he said. Nothing fancy, just eggs and bread. But I thought we should eat before starting work. Work? Well, yes. The ranch doesn't run itself, and you must be eager to see what needs doing. They ate quickly, and then Bertha changed into work clothes she kept hidden in her trunk. Men's trousers and a shirt that had been custom-made years ago. They fit properly now that she wasn't binding herself, and the freedom of movement was glorious. Timothy watched her walk toward the broken fence posts, and his face lit up with something like delight. You're beautiful when you move like that. Like what? Like yourself, unrestrained, natural. He picked up his tools. Show me what you can do. What Bertha could do was extraordinary. She lifted fence posts Timothy couldn't budge. She drove stakes with swings that would have taken him 20 strikes. She hauled stones for the garden wall that would have required a team of horses for anyone else. By noon, they'd accomplished a week's worth of work. Timothy watched with open admiration, occasionally helping where he could, but mostly managing the details, measuring, planning, making sure everything aligned properly. They worked in harmony, her strength and his precision creating something neither could have managed alone. Word spread quickly through Redemption Creek. By the end of the week, several ranchers had ridden out to see the spectacle, Timothy Grayson and his giant bride. Some came to mock. Others came out of genuine curiosity. One afternoon, 3 men rode up while Bertha was repairing the barn roof, a job that would have required scaffolding and a team, but which she managed by simply reaching up from ground level. She was aware of them watching, but continued working. "That your wife, Grayson?" one called out. "Or did you hire a circus act?" Timothy, who'd been working in the garden, stood up slowly. Bertha saw his jaw tighten, his hands ball into fists. He walked toward the men with a determination she hadn't seen before. "That's my wife. Her name is Bertha, and I'd appreciate you addressing her with respect." "Respect? For that? Come on, Timothy. You can't seriously—" "I can. I do. And if you have a problem with my marriage, you're welcome to leave my property and not return." The man sneered. Mighty bold words for someone who needed a freak to save his failing ranch. Bertha climbed down from the roof, moving to stand behind Timothy, not threateningly, but supportively. The men's horses nickered nervously at her approach. "My wife," Timothy continued, his voice steady despite his obvious anger, "is worth 10 of you. She works harder, treats people better, and has more courage in one finger than you've shown in your entire miserable life. Now leave." The men exchanged glances, then rode off with parting insults that Bertha barely registered. She was too focused on Timothy, who was shaking now that the confrontation had ended. "You defended me," she said softly. "Of course I did. You're my wife, my partner, and they have no right to speak to you, to us, that way." Bertha felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd built years ago beginning to crumble. This small man, this person everyone underestimated, had just faced down 3 ranchers to defend her honor, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That evening, after dinner, Timothy pulled out his violin, a fact Bertha hadn't known about him. He played while she washed dishes, filling the cabin with music that was sometimes melancholy, sometimes joyful, always beautiful. When he finished, she sat beside him. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about sleeping arrangements." Timothy set down the violin. "All right. We're married, really married, and I want—" She struggled for words. "I want to be close to you, not just in the day, at night too, if that's something you'd want." "I'd want that very much. But Bertha, I need you to know I'm not expecting anything. Physical intimacy, I mean. That can come when we're both ready, or not at all if that's what you prefer. I just want you near me." They moved her pallet into the bedroom that night. The space was tight with both of them, but not uncomfortably so. Timothy fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's work. Bertha lay awake, listening to his breathing, marveling at the strangeness of sharing space with another person. In the darkness, she whispered, "Thank you." Timothy's hand found hers, sleepy but sure. For what? For seeing me, for wanting me, for not being afraid? "I am afraid," he murmured, "terrified, actually, that you'll realize you could do better, that you'll leave, that this is all too good to be true. I'm afraid of the same things. Then we'll be afraid together, and we'll prove ourselves wrong." Weeks became months. The ranch transformed under their combined efforts. Bertha's strength rebuilt structures, cleared land, managed livestock. Timothy's careful planning and attention to detail ensured everything functioned efficiently. They became known in the region, not always favorably, but known nonetheless. The giant bride and her tiny husband, the spectacle couple, the unlikely pair. But they didn't care what people called them. They had each other, and that proved enough. One afternoon, 6 months into their marriage, Bertha was working in the garden when she heard hoofbeats. A well-dressed woman on a fine horse approached. Mrs. Catherine Whitmore, one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory, and someone who'd been notably absent from the gossip circuit. "Mrs. Grayson?" she called. "Might I speak with you?" Bertha stood, wiping dirt from her hands. "Ma'am." Mrs. Whitmore dismounted and approached, her expression unreadable. She looked up at Bertha without flinching. "I've come to apologize." "For what?" "For staying silent when others mocked you, for not defending you and your husband when I had the social standing to do so." She paused. "I've watched you these months, watched how hard you work, watched how your husband looks at you like you hung the moon, watched you build something real from nothing, and I realized I've been a coward." Bertha didn't know what to say. "I have 2 daughters," Mrs. Whitmore continued. "One is tall for her age, already 5'10" at 15 and still growing. She's been miserable trying to make herself smaller, convinced no man will ever want her. But then she heard about you, about the giant bride who married for love, about how your husband adores you exactly as you are." Her voice cracked. "You gave her hope, Mrs. Grayson. You gave my daughter hope that someday she'll find someone who sees her as a blessing, not a burden." Tears pricked Bertha's eyes. "I'd like to meet her, your daughter." "I was hoping you'd say that. Would you come to dinner, you and Mr. Grayson? Let my girls meet the couple who proved that different doesn't mean wrong?" The dinner happened the following week. Mrs. Whitmore's daughter, Eleanor, stared at Bertha with something like worship. By the end of the evening, the girl was standing straighter, smiling more freely, asking questions about how Bertha had found the courage to stop hiding. "I didn't find it," Bertha said honestly. "Someone gave it to me. My husband saw me truly and said, 'There you are,' instead of turning away. That gave me permission to see myself the same way." Eleanor looked at Timothy, who was deep in conversation with Mr. Whitmore about irrigation systems. "He's so small, though. Doesn't that bother you?" "Why would it? He's exactly the size he needs to be, just like I am." From that dinner, something unexpected grew. Other families with daughters who didn't fit the mold began reaching out. Women who were too tall, too strong, too opinionated, too much of anything that society deemed unfeminine, found hope in Bertha's story. She became, quite accidentally, a symbol. Timothy watched this development with pride. "You're changing minds," he told her one evening, "just by existing, by being yourself without apology." "We're changing minds," Bertha corrected. "You're the one who made it possible, by accepting me, by defending me, by loving me exactly as I am." Their first anniversary arrived with early snow. They celebrated quietly, alone in their cabin, with a dinner of roasted chicken and potatoes. After eating, Timothy produced a small wrapped package. "I made you something." Inside was a new dress. Not a work dress, but something fine, made from fabric he must have traded for in town, sewn with careful stitches that spoke to hours of work. It was sized for her actual frame, no compression required, and designed to accommodate her height and breadth without apology. "It's not a wedding dress," he said nervously, "but I thought you shouldn't have to wear your mother's dress forever. You should have something that's yours, that fits you as you are." Bertha held the dress to her chest, overwhelmed. "When did you make this?" "At night, while you were sleeping. I wanted it to be a surprise." She tried it on immediately, and it fit perfectly. The fabric moved with her body instead of restricting it. The sleeves accommodated her arms. The shoulders sat where they should. She looked at herself in the small mirror and saw for the first time in her life a woman who fit her clothes instead of fighting them. "You're beautiful," Timothy said softly. "You've always been beautiful, but now you can see it too." That night, for the first time, they came together as husband and wife in all ways. It was awkward. Neither had experience, but it was also tender and genuine. Timothy's small frame fit against hers in unexpected ways, and his gentleness made her feel cherished rather than monstrous. Afterward, lying together in the darkness, Bertha spoke the truth that had been growing in her heart for months. "I love you. I don't know if I've said it plainly before, but I do. I love you, Timothy Grayson. You gave me back myself. And you gave me courage, purpose, a reason to be better than I am." He kissed her shoulder. "I love you too, Bertha. Every impossible, magnificent inch of you." Years passed. Their ranch prospered beyond anyone's expectations. They added acreage, brought in cattle, built a second barn. Bertha's strength became legendary in the region, but so did their partnership. People spoke of them not just as the giant and the small man, but as the couple who made the impossible work. They never had children. Bertha's body didn't cooperate in that regard, but they built a different kind of legacy. Young women who didn't fit began appearing at their door, seeking advice or simply acceptance. Bertha and Timothy welcomed them all, showing by example that different bodies could hold beautiful lives. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Bertha no longer owned a single piece of binding. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of clothes that fit her actual frame. She stood at her full height always, took up the space she naturally occupied, and met the world with her head high. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" Timothy asked. "When I told you to stand up straight?" "I remember. I thought you were insane." "I was terrified, absolutely terrified, but when I saw you hunched over in pain, making yourself small for my comfort, I realized something." He took her hand. "I'd spent my whole life making myself seem bigger than I was, working harder, pushing beyond my limits, trying to be the man everyone expected. And here you were, trying to make yourself smaller, both of us denying our truth, both of us hurting ourselves to meet other people's expectations. And I decided right then that I wanted a life where we could both be exactly who we are, where your too much and my not enough could just be who we are, without qualifiers or apologies." Bertha squeezed his hand, marveling as always at how her fingers engulfed his completely. "We did that, built that life. We did, and I'd do it again, every day, forever." Inside the cabin, the wedding dress hung carefully preserved, not as armor or costume now, but as a symbol of transformation, from shame to pride, from hiding to visibility, from loneliness to love. It represented the moment Bertha had stopped waiting for someone to accept her and had instead found someone who celebrated her, the giant bride and her timid husband, the unlikely pair who proved that love doesn't require matching exteriors or conventional proportions. That sometimes the strongest foundations are built from complementary differences. That too much and not enough can add up to exactly right when two people have the courage to be honest, to be vulnerable, to be wholly themselves. That evening, as they prepared for bed, Timothy paused in the doorway. "What are you waiting for?" he asked, echoing his words from that first day. Bertha smiled, understanding the deeper question. What was she waiting for? Permission to be happy? Proof that this was real? Assurance that it would last? "Nothing," she answered. "I'm not waiting for anything anymore. I have everything I need right here." And she did. In the small cabin on the edge of the frontier, in the arms of the man who'd looked at her full height and said, "There you are," in the life they'd built from honesty and courage and stubborn refusal to be anything other than themselves, the giant bride had found her home. And in finding it, she'd discovered that love, real love, doesn't ask you to diminish yourself. It asks you to stand tall, take up space, and trust that there's someone who will meet you exactly where you are and say, "Perfect. You're perfect exactly as you are." That was the gift they gave each other every day, and it was more than enough. It was everything